So welcome to the last session. Now we are going to provide the summary of the working groups that we had yesterday. So we had six beautiful and interactive working groups. So now let me introduce Craig Lee to provide a summary for the first working group.
Okay, thank you. So here we are. I'm not Ramesh Rangachar. As I said before, he is on a 2-week business trip. So he actually did the lines work in terms of putting the entire session together. But I think we had a very good cross-section of talks. We had a lot of robust discussion, which I'm very happy with. And when I get to my conclusions, we'll actually have plans for next year. So in terms of the session goals, obviously we wanted to investigate the convergence of cloud computing, big data, and what I like to call big identity in the context of ground systems. And by big identity, I mean those methods whereby you can manage policy, identity, access, all those things across these distributed infrastructures that we're trying to build. So we can drill down into key mission requirements, benefits and challenges, and the enablers for actually moving in this direction. And then again, this notion of convergence between cloud computing and big data, and also this notion of the urbanization of ground systems. And I just wanted to use this one picture from Jim G. that is, I think, a marvelous metaphor for what we're trying to do here. That in the past, everybody had to build their own systems from the ground up. You're out, like on the frontier by yourself. But now we're moving into this urban environment where there's going to be this vast array of infrastructure that's there that you can utilize. And so how this affects ground systems, how we put them together, what kind of infrastructure is out there is going to be a challenge for the future. But I think this is just a marvelous metaphor for what we're trying to do. So in terms of the actual presenters and panelists that we had a very nice conversation around containers that was led by Ann Chervenak. A very robust conversation was the term that was used. The SCAPE framework actually talks about how to put together a number of open source projects to give you a big data capability. And actually, why don't I go ahead to this key points, but this is summarizing everything that happened in those particular talks. So SCAPE was this integration of the open source tools to give you a cloud-hosted big data capability. So they had data registries, in-memory, big data processing, and so forth. The EO payload data ground segment, this actually gave us like a 10-year journey of how to produce this converged physical and virtual infrastructure for the entire ground segment enterprise. And then finally, I was able to talk about federation management, which I think is part and parcel of how we're going to move into this urbanized environment. That how we manage federated identity and federated resource management in these multi-tenant environments is going to be critical. And that's this notion of securely bridging silos, that if you just do a forklift for your system, then you're going to wind up with a siloed system anyway. Okay, so for the final conclusions, I wanted to talk about, well, okay, how do we enable this urbanization, how this deployment of these into this complex ecosystem of provided infrastructure services and mission partners. You're not just going to be building something yourself, you're going to be moving into a neighborhood, as it were. I think a theme that came out of all of the discussion and all the presentations was this notion of how to migrate existing missions into the cloud. So part of that is how do you identify common services in what you have right now, how you would actually reevaluate whether you're going to do a forklift rehost, or actually whether you're going to do some refactoring of your mission, or whether you're going to sort of start over and just completely rebuild everything. Obviously there's a spectrum there. Most people will probably land somewhere in the middle. But I actually think that we will try to focus on that for next year's GSAW. Given that this, like I say, this was an emerging theme, that I think there's probably a lot of work that we can do in terms of corralling people that have the right kind of experience doing this, and point some ways to the future. And then one last thing I wanted to mention is that in support of all this, that NIST and IEEE are standing up this joint Cloud Federation working group. And the goal here is to sort of identify and define what Cloud Federation means for the U.S. government, and then also areas for potential standardization. There's certainly a number of piece parts out there, but how we put it together, whereby, this kind of community can put this into, RFPs is, there's a lot of work to be done. And also just educating up in terms of the capabilities that are going to be available. So the engagement of stakeholders and vendors is going to be critical. So mention this to all your friends in high places and keep in contact with me. And I think I'll cede back my last 7 seconds. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Craig. So next is Don Sether from Realizing the Look Beyond the Horizon.
First, I want to thank all of our participants that were there, and also our panelists. It was a really wonderful. It was one of the better ones that we've had. Basically, our group went out, and we weren't looking at so much. There was a lot of technology that was mentioned during this conference. A lot of good stuff that was mentioned. The question is, how do we infuse that into our systems? What is the how? How do we bring if we're trying to converge to an enterprise, how do we do that? How do we convince management that this is important? How do we work toward funding? What do we do to realize that look beyond the horizon? Because technology in and of itself, just because it's cool, doesn't mean it's going to be used. So we wanted to identify some transition challenges that are faced by the organization and then get some suggestions for help on how we might work them. We had a wide variety of people that were on our panel here. We had people from industry, we had people from the military. We had operators who actually fly the satellites. We had foreign groups as well as just civilian folks also. And thank you to all of them, and especially the participants. You can tell we had quite a large group. So, what do we find out? Collaboration, it's very, very important, and it's essential to success, but it is difficult and time-consuming. On the European side, they were talking time periods of 2 to 3 years to get the MOA signed between the stakeholders to get the efforts rolling. So in a lot of sense, it is very time-consuming, but that has paid off well for them because everybody's on the same dance page. So earlier the better, and you can combine stakeholders with similar needs to identify common solutions. In other words, you may have hundreds of stakeholders that are there, but there are several of them that have needs that are the same. Can you get those to collaborate with each other and then act with them as if they were one entity? Some organizations are just not conducive to becoming a full enterprise. Okay, that's all right. We talked with NASA. They've got 9 NASA centers, and they have very definite ways of doing business. They also have different business goals. Does it even make sense to make them into one common enterprise? And the answer to that is probably not. But are there things that they can do that would help to gain efficiencies? Yeah, combining software, pooling software, making it available across the centers, putting common data centers into the things to work off of a common IT infrastructure. All of that stuff saves cost, it saves time, and allows for collaboration which didn't occur before. And so, yeah, it's not a fully federated enterprise, but by the same token, they took small victories and they make them into big wins. Human and culture factors are a major hurdle, and it is slow and difficult to change. There will be resistance to new processes that come out. Count on it and plan for it. People will leave your organization because you are not doing business the same way and they are upset. Plan on it. It's going to happen. You need a business plan to sell the transition benefits to stakeholders. One of the interesting things that came out is lack of funds, lean programs, and lean budgets. It's a blessing and a curse. In many senses, it spurs people to innovate. And sometimes that's the only way you can get them to start to innovate and accept it. Look for crises to exploit. As things go bad in your system, you can sit there and say, yeah, if you'd done it this way, we wouldn't be having this problem today. Quite often, that's a way to be able to get funding and get the attention that you need to be able to move forward. Produce small wins that are positive. Yeah, make your efforts small. Make them successful. When people start to see success and patterns of success, they tend to favor those efforts more. Go for appropriate infrastructures. If you build the infrastructure right, it can foster innovation. You can actually make it part of the process. Rigid enforcement of standards helps to provide interoperability. And overall, we had a process. 1, understand what your real missions are. Please notice your real missions. Be honest. Delivering science, it's supporting the warfighter. It's delivering imagery. It's not building satellites. Assess the real needs to perform the missions. What do I really need to make that happen? Select and optimize based on your needs. You will always get what you optimize for. Whether you intentionally do it or you unintentionally do it, you will always get what you have asked for. Go do. Avoid the paralysis by analysis. Yes, some analysis needs to take place. But typically when you have a lot of money, you will sit there and study it to death because no one wants to make a decision, and you have the money to study it to death. So remember, good enough is good enough, and it is certainly better than nothing at all. The one thing that we found, and this is our takeaway, I don't care whether you're foreign or you're domestic, whether you're military, whether you're civilian, or whether you're commercial, the challenges that we face to transition are extremely similar. And the principles that you saw up there, which may look a lot like motherhood and apple pie, typically aren't being applied and followed. Anyway, thank you, and thanks for all who participated.
Thank you, Don. So the next working group, Ryan Noguchi, for the enabling game-changing innovation through model-based engineering.
Okay, so we had a great discussion yesterday with about 24 folks. Again, focusing on an open discussion without panels or presentations. And we basically had a great discussion. I didn't have to do a whole lot of facilitation because everyone came with a lot of interests, varied interests, and brought those to bear. We wanted to talk about how innovation can be sponsored, enabled, and facilitated by MBSE, as well as areas for collaboration. And I'm going to touch on all these areas in the next few slides. But basically, first thing we do is we always go around the room and find out who's there and what their burning interests are with regard to model-based engineering. And so we find this is a great opportunity to then kind of seed everyone in the audience on what some of the issues and concerns are. And we end up touching on all of these areas, and in some cases spending quite a bit of time on some areas that are of common interest. So I'm not going to go and read through all these. You can see these. But there's a wide variety of interests of folks. There are some folks who are very seasoned practitioners in the field, and others who are just learning about it, and everything in between. And so it's a great opportunity to share experiences. But this is kind of the general flow of the kind of topics that we really spent the most time discussing at the working group. Alan Jeffries brought up the very successful effort that he and his team has been performing for NOAA and NASA. And I think if you stayed for the evening session yesterday, you heard a little bit more about that. We talked a lot about cultural issues, and in particular how to balance the needs of architects, systems engineers, operators, and other stakeholders who all have different perspectives to bear and bring different challenges to infusing model-based engineering. And educating all those stakeholders about what MBSE is and how it can benefit them is a big challenge that we all face, and one of the things that we want to take on as a community to try to address. We talked quite a lot about the use of models to really capture corporate knowledge, and a lot of that knowledge is held within local channels. Everyone has their own piece of the pie that they understand, but holistically together we may know everything, but we can't really communicate that very effectively without the use of these models to really bring that knowledge together and identify those disconnects. We talked quite a lot about tools, quite a lot about the challenges that we have in using the different tools and interoperating between them, and we talked a lot about how we are trying to better use and drive the tool vendors to move in directions that we need them to go for our domain. We also talked quite a bit about how MBSE can facilitate the agile environment, and there are some challenges also in incorporating it in an agile software environment. Let's see. So we talk quite a bit about innovations. We see MBSE as a means of enabling innovations. We think it's an enabler of innovation in and of itself. ESA, I think, has provided an example of how MBSE has helped them to do something that they couldn't have done before, hadn't really been able to do before, like developing these simulators with very little additional cost and resources that traditionally we might have skipped doing because it requires quite a bit of effort to do. But you can use model-based systems engineering to develop this in a much more streamlined fashion, and therefore do what you couldn't have done before because you didn't have the resources to do it. Not because the technology wasn't necessarily there, but because you apply your limited resources in different ways. We also talked about some other ways we can apply MBSE to really change the game of how we do things, model-driven testing, and how we can drive toward an end state where perhaps we are using the model to do the majority of our verification and testing processes, even starting from the very beginning of the program. And we talked a lot about, well, what is the benefit of model-based systems engineering? Is it really return on investment, or is it really helping you to buy down your risk? And then as areas for collaboration, there seemed to be a lot of interest in setting up some kind of ground systems, MBSE community of interest, and maybe in COSI, NDIA, maybe DOD's digital engineering working groups, some of these other avenues for facilitating and providing infrastructure to support these collaborations could be very useful. We talked a lot about these three areas for potential collaboration. Collaborating on a common ground system model or reference architecture, ontology, and so forth. Sharing pooling our resources in doing tool assessments and surveys so that we can better take advantage of the emerging and evolving tool sets, as well as building a tutorial product that is tailored to our domain that can really help educate and demystify MBSE for our stakeholders. And in particular, capturing a lot of these case studies, these very positive small wins or big wins that can really help turn these stakeholders from skeptics into true believers. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Ryan. So next is Jim Alstad for cost estimation for next generation ground systems.
Thank you, Sue. We had a small but enthusiastic group, and we had a lot of feedback from our participants. So Dr. Boehm and I learned a lot. So our goals were to inform the participants about COSISMO 3.0 software engineering, systems engineering cost estimating model, about the motivation of the model, the value, the content, and the status of it. And then get feedback on the model, which was very successful. And we tried to sensitize participants to the need to contribute data to the model. Dr. Boehm and I led the presentations, and we were assisted by Mary Lee. The session focused on this cost estimating model. It introduces some new cost estimating parameters and the group seemed to feel that those were actually helpful to do more accurate cost estimation. The attendees were impressed by the depth of published supporting research, and the model is open. That is to say, people can see how the gears turn, they can comment on its internals, and it improves the state of the art across the field. So in conclusions, participants gained confidence in the COSISMO 3.0 expert-based model. It's an interim model. General consensus was that the directions of the model were sound. Participants identified minor flaws in supporting materials. I put together an estimating spreadsheet, which people found some bugs in my estimating spreadsheet, and it was helpful. Participants made suggestions for future enhancements, and they pointed out that each cost driver individually had a significant effect on the cost estimate. So if you tweak one of the parameters, you got a big impact. And participants were sympathetic to providing actual data, projects to calibrate the model. The model is not finished yet. We need some actual data, and I need that data badly. So there I am with my hat in my hand and a cardboard side. I brought my hat with me today. So I'm hoping, I would dearly love to get some ground station system engineering data points into my thesis data. We can protect that data as proprietary. Dr. Boehm has been protecting proprietary data for over 30 years. None of it has ever escaped. And we're hoping that if there's any customer types in the audience, that they would encourage their contractors to contribute data. It improves the long-term cost estimation ability of the fields. It tends to result in better, cost estimation, better adherence to contracts. So I'll be here for a few more minutes, and I'm hoping to pick up some business cards. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. So next is Sky Troyer for working together to improve resiliency through cybersecurity.
Whew, what a long name. I don't even think I can say that. Scott Niebuhr and I put together this working group, and we brought a big group of panelists with us. Most of them are actually coming from industry, and they do not have any space or ground experience. And as expected, it was a heated discussion, and it was a very exciting overview of what industry is doing, what the current trend is. So here are some of the topics we discussed. We talked about how to manage insider threats, how to manage incident responses. We talked about some of the crypto as well as some of the latest strategies of making it resilient. So this is our group of panelists. As you can see, most of them are coming from a wide variety of background, and they brought in some very interesting discussion points. We consider it very successful, as for 4 hours we didn't discuss anything on RMF. So some of the key points that we discussed was how to implement some of the zero trust architectures and how to manage some of the insider threats. As we know, a lot of the touch point of the cyber, the most vulnerable part is really on the user and on the user backend on where they could touch. And then also on how to manage some of the cyber breach, as the incident response is actually one of the most important part. The question is not that if we'll be attacked, it's that when we'll be attacked. And when we are attacked, are you ready to mitigate that, and what are your strategy? And some of our customers brought in some very good framework that we can use, and they have used it on some very public and very high-profile incidents cases. And then also we talked about some of the changing landscapes of changing from serial to IP and how that have affected the crypto industry and how we will adapt to some of that. And then to be on the proactive side, we also talked about how to actually use deception techniques to prevent our attackers to coming in and actually attract them to certain spots where we could easier to detect them. So, and then we also talked about software assurance and some of the cyber resilience strategies. So what are some of the conclusions and key points that we talked about? One is simplify the system, survey your system, audit your system, remove any redundant and unused portion, standardize them, make it easier to manage. And then also consolidate your tool chain. We have so many tools. It's more important to have less tools, but have very skilled people know your tools back and forth so that you can mitigate that cyber attacks when you have incident that happens. And also train your people well and be proactive, create deceptions for your attackers. And we also talked about some of the new technologies, for example, focus more on threat modeling, focus on building the threat modeling, focus on having your mitigation plan already established so that you're ready to deal with some of these incidents. So we had a very lively discussion, and we'll have a presentation this afternoon at the classified session as well. If you have any interest, please contact me and Scott. Thank you.
Thank you, Sky. So next, I will talk about the working group summary from the Agile, Adopting Agile Ground Software Development Working Group. So we have a wide variety of participants from commercial, from government team, from contractors. So I would like to thank all the participants for all the lively discussion. So we have a lot of techniques and lessons learned that we have collected and discussed among the participants. So we had two presentations that talked about how did we apply the agile development in an actual project, what are the lessons learned, what are the roles and responsibilities, what are the problems and challenges that we had at the beginning. And then we also revisit the lessons learned that we collected from the previous GSAW working groups. So, and then we have the open discussion, open floor discussion on several problems that we still have. For example, in terms of agile acquisition milestone deliverables, what kind of milestone are you using? How can we handle those PDR and CDRs? What are the roles and responsibilities? How to measure success? How to do the trust? So some of the pain points that people still have when, although they already, start doing agile, adopting agile. Balancing between rigor and agility, how to, make sure that you still can get those certification, accreditation, do all the development documents and, do all those milestones, but it still can be agile, right? So some more pain points around the cultural changes, adjustment. We got some resistance. We have to manage the expectation from several stakeholders. Top-level managers are expecting to see progress. Sometimes they see red dots on the dashboard. Now, they don't like it. So, what should we do? How can we say that we are having progress? But, having some red dots doesn't mean that we are going backward. But, so these things are expected to be there. In the government setting, usually it will take us 3-4 weeks to provide turnaround time for comments and feedback. Now we can't handle that, the long turnaround time anymore. So how can we make it quicker? Agile team. To be in an agile project, we would prefer to have agile ready people. So how can we get them ready? If we are not ready, then they'll provide a lot of resistance. We'll provide a lot of pushback. So how can we make sure that everyone on the team is ready? And then we're trying to improve so much. We try to to optimize the team, optimize the project, optimize the process. And sometimes we, have some pain from optimization. Some projects, programs that we have seen switching into agile in mainstream, in midstream. So those cause a lot of pushback. Those cause a lot of, the challenges that we have seen. And then some people use agile in term only. They just want to do less documentation, or they just don't want to coordinate or communicate with the stakeholders, saying that, agile team will do whatever they want. So these are some kind of problems that we have seen in the misuse of agile. So in terms of agile role, we are talking that, typically we have Scrum Master, Product Owner, Development Team. So is there any other role that would be interesting, would be useful? So, participant mentioned that if the government, we suggest that the government should be the Product Owner. But if the government wants to be the product owner, we need continuous commitment. You have to be there to answer the question. You need to be there to understand what's going on. So if you are not committed to be there, so it is going to hurt the project more than not being the product owner. Agile coach for the new project that are transitioning into an agile would be a very useful role. Other roles are subject matter experts, user representative, overarching system engineer, testing teams, integration teams. So these are extremely important people that we have to make sure that we involve them in the agile team. So we talked about, we need leadership support. So what would be the differences in the agile team compared to the traditional team? So looks like it turned out good leadership could be in both traditional project or agile project. But something that stands out are willing to change, be flexible, ability to accept failure. We have right people, but make sure that they are at the right seat, have the right role, need good communication, support the team, know what to look for and delegate well. So a heated conversation came with, how to measure success, what kind of metrics that we are looking for. Slog requirements, traceability might not be, the metrics that we would hope for anymore. So we go back to the Agile Manifesto and principles. So working software is basically the best indicator, the best metric to identify whether the team is good or not. Business value, looking at a trend rather than individual day-to-day metrics. It doesn't have to be in a number. It could be qualitative metrics, percentage on track and late and not started. So those are some useful information. Happiness of the team is also extremely important. So you don't want the team to work 60 hours work week for 4 weeks in a row or 4 months in a row. So those are going to hurt the team, and then it will reflect in the personnel turnover. So these are some interesting metrics that we have seen. Then the other one that is also very interesting and we should really focus on is the trust management. So Agile moves very fast, so you really need to trust your team. And not only trust your team, but trust your stakeholders, trust the trust between the government team, contractors, subcontractors. So we need to make sure that we have honest communication. There'll be no surprise. We have to talk in open dialogue, what works, what doesn't work, have the joint success culture. So make sure that you keep doing the continuous improvement. So that's the kind of a summary for the Agile working group. And now since I have the stage and I have the microphone, I'm going to talk a little more. So next, after we have this GSAW, GSAW working groups yesterday evening, so I have been taking notes for all the presentations that we have in the past 3 days. So here are the summary of the presentation. Keynote speakers from our keynotes, more than 20 presentations that we have, and some comments or some tidbits from the tutorials and some working group. So, during the past 3 days, we learned a lot of new technologies. We learned about space war fighting construct. We talked about EGS. We talked about advanced development. We talked about enterprise level. We talked about visualization, software as a service, machine learning, autonomy. But, since I don't have Alexa at home, so, I called my husband and said, "Husband, could you create..." They said, "Husband, could you create infographic that represent GSAW for this year?" Well, husband did not respond, but I did this myself. So, so here we go. So I put all the presentations together, put into Wordle, and this is the top 50 words that I got from the Wordle. So I hope you can, relate to the key terms that we have here. So common terms are, ground, so there, systems are there, satellites are there, GEMSECs are there, operations, agile security, BSA, and everything. So, I hope that you, get to see the keywords that would relate to you. Okay. So on top of that, we also heard a lot of helping, a lot of improvement in the smarter system. For example, Alexa, the new person that is not actually in the room, but has been called upon quite often, right? So, we heard that, ask Alexa to launch the federated ground system. We heard that we, asked Alexa to move satellite to the higher orbit, or Alexa told us that please don't do anything, go home, and then I'll call you when, when there's any problem. So, one of the presenters mentioned that you don't have to be expert in anything or in everything. We can just put the request and then Alexa will help you. Or you can ask Jim, as in GEMSEC. So GEMSEC is supposed to be able to answer every question, right? So, and then we got a lot of new themes, new idea, new concepts these days. Without vision, the people perish. Right. We heard about dynamic international collaboration. We heard Pemlov architecture, so something that we have not heard before, invented here. So, it seems like undoable, but, once we think outside the box, it looks like Pemlov could be something that we have to look at. So, we talk about security, we can be compromised, but make sure that we are resilient enough to reconstitute quickly. We have a lot of data. That could be good news and that could be bad news because we have a lot of data, right? So operators and engineers do not consider security as innovation. So make sure that we have to institutionalize those kind of concepts in mind from the get-go. Several needed technologies are already there. People are doing it at home. So one presenter said, if you can do it at home, you could do it at the DoD level, right? So we heard about change is the new norm, right? So we heard innovation is painful but necessary. We heard that 7 years ago, the biggest threat is physical security, but today the threat has changed to cyber, to software, right? So we heard that, well, last year we talked about congested competitive space environment, but this year we heard that now the space is contested too. We heard that ground system is going to change every 3 to 5 years, but more important than that, software is changing faster than that. So we have to be able to evolve and then change ourselves to catch up the pace. So this generation, they see everything as an app. So we have to think everything as an app too, or app compatible kind of capability. So I talk about, well, people can't change because they focus too much on the now. So think about in the past, current, and also future. We heard about the risks, and that somehow we change from risk aversion to risk fondness. So, people take more risks, but we have to make sure that we do trade-off analysis. We do, careful consideration on that. But then we heard about, 20 years later, probably we are still going to talk about the getting rid of those stovepipes. So one presenter mentioned that, well, all I need is money, people, and ConOps. Money has been mentioned several times, and then we talked about, well, probably the things that we are working on, I don't have enough money for that. Or we talk about we have too much money, like big money or fatty budget. So when we have big money, when we have fatty budget, usually that will allow diversity, but we always add new requirements, which will make it more complex and will make it more expensive, and we don't think about reusability. So we have to be careful on those. So we heard about the don't stop advocating to solve problems that people don't know what they have, like cloud technologies. It has been there before, even we heard a lot in today's conferences or workshops. So you think about that before we need it. We don't need Big Bang to start doing it. It could be run alongside. It could be prototype. It could be proof of concepts. And then leadership. We need leadership. Leadership will, people will ask how you do it. It is the leadership role to think about that in advance, think about that ahead of time. And then, think about that. Don't only only think about new things, but look back so that the lessons learned won't be the lessons forgotten. So some more interesting Fitbit. So we heard about, that we have lowest staffing at program level at SMC, but, interestingly that we have twice as many programs. And then probably we have to rethink the requirements. Probably we don't need requirements that have to be there for 15 years. Maybe, we need something quicker, more adaptable, evolvable than that. And we heard a lot of new terms this year. Like, we have GSAW, and then we have MSAW, we have XSAW. So those are something that, we have to think about. We need space law too. And then everything is becoming as a service right now, navigation as a service, spacecraft as a service, and many other things as a service. So I think I talked enough. So I would like to introduce Rick Johnson, conference chair. Thank you.